Welcome to segment 3 of Governance Building Your Best Board. My name is Margot Crawford, and I'm very pleased to be here and to speak to you on this topic, which is how to recruit the best board members. Recruiting board members. Probably this is one of the most challenging topics or matters that board members and sport organizations face. It's a really difficult job, and it's hard to get those people on your boards. Just for context, I want to give a bit of my background. While I am a business person and I sit on many boards, international development boards, foundation boards, technology boards, etc., I also have a sport background. I was, as a previous presenter, Jan O'Donnell, on the Nakutok Ski Club board for several years, and I served as the president for 3 years. I was also involved in a major program with Skate Canada, Skate Ontario, major structural transformation that led to major governance issues. So I do blend the policy governance board background together with the truly operational nature that is the reality of sport organizations, and recognize the tug and pull of those two conflicting sometimes requirements. And where to find board members, knowing those key gaps, and trying to find a way of moving the needle towards a more governance board by filling those gaps, often in legal, finance, policy, fundraising, etc. These are all big challenges and hard to do, but they really point to the desire of organizations wanting to inject more policy and governance into the organizations, which is good news. It needs to be there. And of course, the other challenges are just the practical ones. There's a limited pool to look to. You tend to continue to draw upon the same people, and this can be good and it can be bad. It's really hard to move that needle of towards diversity and getting people who can operate out of just the sport focus, and get coverage on other skills that you need to get on the board. And of course, volunteers are dispersed. They're very time challenged, and just asking them to do more is tough. The ultimate goal, though, is to really get good governance and really increase those fiduciary capabilities and responsibilities. And that's good fundamentally for the whole organization. So it's a really important goal to strive for. So I want to go over some of the practices of finding, some of the best practices of how to find a good board, and hopefully give a few tips and tricks that will help others. Okay, so in terms of finding a new board member, this is where process is going to rule. And by having good process and structure is really going to elevate your ability to find good board members. But it is one of those activities that frankly does remain relatively done at the last minute, and is pretty ad hoc. But processes I have seen and used in creating new boards and in finding new boards have really resulted in great outcomes. So I want to speak to some of these pieces that you want to really commit to. What I would really suggest first and foremost, if you don't have it, you should establish it, even if it's not an ongoing committee. It can just be an ad hoc committee, but a committee nevertheless. Typically it's a governance committee who is looking at recruiting the new board members. Don't worry about establishing it for long term if it doesn't make sense, but make sure you have that ad hoc committee. Have people identified who are going to oversee and own and be accountable for this. Thinking clear steps. So I've got some of the steps here, and I'm going to go into them in a little bit more detail. Planning, going back to the skills matrix that was covered off in segment 2, is going to be a really important guidepost, as well as the weighting in that skill set. So start talking about that very early on, not when you're finally thinking about, okay, who are we going to add to the board? We're coming up to the AGM. That's the wrong time. Who is going to be involved, and what are the goals? Who's going to help? Who's going to help in this process? Who else can you draw in to get extra help? It doesn't necessarily have to just be your board members. So really think about and be intentional about the planning. Who's going to do what? When is it going to happen? What are we going to look for? And in terms of timing, and we'll speak about the timing sequence of the other steps, but timing is important. You have to think about the normal cycles in your organization and plan around it. Sports have typically seasonal cycles that have busier periods and quieter periods. I would suggest to you the best time to go out and engage and solicit interest is probably not when you're right in the midst of your busiest period. People are tapped out. They are certainly not thinking about doing more. I think so. You want to be mindful of that timing and plan around that. And of course, you have to think about working backwards from your AGM, which is ultimately when you put a slate forward, and know how to plan for getting board members onto that or getting a slate pulled together. And you have to think also about your stage departure. So timing is very, very important. So into recruitment. Recruitment is really a critical area where you have to think about very specific steps and phases. Get a timeline together, get a project time pulled together with your team, and thinking about what are the key dates, allow time for looking for people and meeting with people, who is going to be involved and who is going to be accountable. Don't just leave it as the shotgun method. Everybody go out and bring names back at the next meeting. That's not planning. Think about your readiness as well. Before you get going and just we're recruiting, there's a phase and then activities and materials you need to pull together that are going to help you be successful. So in that phase, I'll call it the readiness and preparation, you want to think about having information like job descriptions pulled together, which we will go over in another area. Materials, additional materials to post, where you're going to put this information. So thinking about where those pieces are going to go and what materials you need. Do you need forms, etc.? So you want to, in that first phase of readiness and prep, think about that open call. You're going to put it out. You want to have the very clear descriptions. You want to have very clear instructions on how to apply. How are people going to put their names forward? You have to make it very easy and lower the barriers. Be very conscious of that the reality that people may perceive the board or people who are very, very engaged, like I'll call them the Uber volunteers, as kind of a closed inner circle. This wouldn't be obviously necessarily the intention, but it can be the perception. So particularly to newcomers, you want to be cognizant of that and really battle against it. Make sure there's a good reach out to people who, might be peering in from what feels like the outside. You just don't know who else might be interested. As I said, have very clear instructions and communicate how to express interest. Have very clear deadlines and communicate the steps of the process so people understand. And, when you do actually put out calls to action or how to apply, make sure it's very clear. Here's who to call, or click on this link, or send something through to info at. So think about all of this before you actually get out in recruiting. Phase 2 then is the actual recruitment and sourcing. This is hard work. It won't happen in the course of just 2 board meetings. And I've lived it myself where the board is charged with, okay, go get names and bring them back to the next board meeting, and then we'll evaluate. There's more work to it than that, and you have to plan that. You have to work very hard to get beyond your familiar, close networks. You have to using just your usual communications, like a website and a newsletter, etc. Don't just look around the table at each other and ask, who do you think we can get on the board? That is not networking, and it's not sourcing. So again, this is hard work, but committing to it makes a big difference. Be creative, and we'll talk a little bit more about this later, about where and how you can find people, but just fundamentally be creative. Think about your high potentials. Generally, there are individuals that you may want to target because they fill a necessary skill gap. So once you identify those people, think about who is going to reach them, when, as well as what order. Sequencing is very important. You want to really focus on those critical gaps and getting those filled first. You want to avoid awkward situations. You have 3 high potentials, but you only need 1, and they're all interested. How are you going to deal with that? Also, avoid the temptation of just adding all of them to your board if you had all of them interested. That's not going to get you to where you need to be. The next phase is evaluation. This is a 2-way street, and it's very, very important. It's not just the board evaluating candidates. We really want to make sure that the candidates are evaluating the board, and make sure that they understand that. Individuals should understand who is on the board, what the expectations are, the commitments on the work activities. Be prepared to answer it open, honestly, and consistently. You don't want one board member saying one thing to some people and something else to others. Review all the candidates that have expressed interest and use that matrix as your guidepost. It's very appealing sometimes, and it's a bit of a trap when a very well recognized sport leader or athlete puts up their hand. But really be honest and truthful and align to what those critical gaps are, and let them know that this is really important to fill. Don't fall into the trap of just bringing anybody on. And don't feel desperate. You may have to go at it a few times. So the process of getting that long list down to a short list, you're going to have to spend time face-to-face with individuals, make sure everybody has, who are charged with this, have common questions, discussing the roles, make sure you're sharing the vision. People don't necessarily know what the bigger plans are, so you want to make sure that they understand that. Address questions, even they may even have very practical ones. How often do you meet? Where do you meet? What's the length of the meetings? So be prepared and be consistent. And confirm their willingness and ability to stand. And don't downplay this. Really, it's not you to rope someone in. Understand what it is, and it might not be the right time. It's better to know than to have a disengaged board member joining you. Talk about the next steps. Make sure they understand things will have to go to an AGM. And also when that first meeting will be, should they get on the board, so that they can pre-plan and be successful in getting on board and active engaged right away. In terms of nominations and elections, bylaws will establish the rules and processes on this. So make sure you know them and you're following them. Understand how to properly bring nominations forward and build this into your agenda for the AGM. Discuss in advance how to address nominations that may come to the floor. So in terms of what goes into a recruitment description, we have some samples here. Generally, I would say it's pretty key to have some very general background around what the history is and so on, and the background of the board. Provide general organization description, let them know if there's paid staff, and the general overall duties is the opening segment. It's really important to have the general duties versus the specific requirements. The general duties is going to speak to the character, knowledge, time commitments, expectations, maybe general sport knowledge. This is going to set the tone about you being a policy board, that there's an expectation to operate at that level. Then get into the specific requirements, drawing from the skills matrix where you have some skills you want to fill. And you don't necessarily need one candidate for each specific skill. You want to get coverage, but you can speak to all of those pieces. Be clear about the expectations on the job description, so that's right there front and center, and people can self-evaluate if they can participate. So let them know what the number of meetings are, that they are expected to participate, also what operational activities there might be, and also that there will be orientation and training provided. Where do you look? Finding board members is hard. This is where, going back to the earlier point, that you want to really think about, be creative and think about your broad community and your ecosystem. There are a lot of channels that you can explore, obviously in your sport community, but also outside of your sport community. Be transparent and open and be willing to look beyond that immediate community. So obviously you want to make sure you're reaching your athletes, parents, coaches, officials, volunteers, partners, suppliers. Think about how you can reach them, whether it's a direct contact or you're achieving that through messaging and making sure that you're accessing the tools and resources that are available broadly to and very cheaply to most organizations. CIRC obviously has a great resource on their job board, and obviously would highly recommend that. Your club website. Social media, not just your club's social media profiles, but also individuals. Use Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter. Make sure that there's good push out to a broad community that you're looking for individuals to serve on the board, with a very clear call to action on how they can apply, who to speak to. You may also want to look at a couple of other paid job boards that are fairly low cost, like LinkedIn, Charity Village, the Institute of Corporate Directors as well. speak to your PSO and NSO if they have job sites or if they have newsletters that they can push out interest. Um, and then also, if you're looking for very specific skills, let's say it is legal skills, reach into the law firms. You may have law firm partners, and certainly in your community, you probably have lawyers. Let people know that you're looking for legal skills, and if they're not interested or able to serve, see if they're able to help you reach those communities. So the point here is that you have to put a lot of effort to really reach out and think beyond just the passive thing of putting it up on the website and just sending out kind of your usual communications to your community. You have to think beyond that and get very, very creative. So thank you. This concludes segment 3 of Governance Building Your Best Board. Continue learning by watching segment 4 on terms of reference and policies.